The mall was alive with opulence and energy. Bright lights glittered from every display window, casting glimmers across the marble floor like stars scattered on the ground. Soft instrumental music floated through the air, mingling with the quiet chatter of shoppers, the distant click of heels, and the occasional beep of registers. It was the kind of place where money moved silently, elegance whispered, and everyone knew who belonged. At least, they thought they did. Emily and Brandon walked side by side, their fingers loosely entwined, perfectly in sync. She wore a cream-colored coat that matched her purse and heels. He had on a crisp, tailored blazer, designer sunglasses resting on his head. They didn't speak in full sentences most of the time. They didn't have to. A smirk, a raised brow, a shared glance told stories no one else needed to hear. They belonged here. Everyone else was either decoration or disruption. As they passed a jewelry boutique, Brandon pointed toward a pair of watches inside the window, and they both laughed. Emily leaned in and whispered something about overpriced elegance to make herself feel superior to the luxury she pretended to admire. That's when she saw him. Just beyond the fountain that gleamed beneath the crystal skylight, a man stood still, alone. He was black. His hoodie was a soft grey, plain, unbranded. His jeans were neat but ordinary. His shoes looked comfortable, not expensive. He wasn't shopping. He wasn't smiling. He was just standing there looking around, typing something into his phone now and then. Emily's smile faded. She didn't even realize she'd stopped walking until Brandon tugged her hand. She leaned closer to him. Lost or looking for the food court? Brandon glanced in the same direction and let out a quiet laugh. Nah, probably just trying to find free Wi-Fi. They both chuckled. Their laughter was louder than it should have been, louder than the space could carry without being noticed. And it was. The man lifted his gaze from his phone. His eyes met theirs. Calm. Collected. He gave them a small, polite nod. It was nothing threatening, nothing aggressive. But neither Emily nor Brandon acknowledged it. Instead, Emily rolled her eyes and shook her head slightly. People like that just don't belong here, she muttered. Brandon didn't respond. He didn't have to. They kept walking, still stealing glances at the man behind them, expecting, no, hoping that mall security would appear and escort him out. People like that were out of place in this temple of luxury. People like them were the standard. But instead of leaving, the man walked toward the security desk. Emily nudged Brandon, whispering excitedly, "Told you, he's going to be asked to leave." Brandon smiled, enjoying the small drama. They stopped near a clothing store, pretending to browse, their eyes still locked on the scene unfolding by the elevator. The security guard didn't stop him. In fact, he stepped aside. The man nodded once more and disappeared behind the elevator doors, swiping a sleek black card on a hidden panel beside the controls. Emily frowned. "Wait, what was that?" Before Brandon could respond, the private elevator opened again. This time, a small group of sharply dressed individuals emerged. 3 men, 2 women, suits, clipboards, lanyards. One of them immediately approached the man in the hoodie, handing him a thick folder. He accepted it calmly and began speaking, pointing toward different parts of the mall. Emily's brow creased. "What is going on?" The group followed the man as he walked down the main corridor, talking about foot traffic, lease values, and footpath obstructions. The words weren't clear, but the authority was. Mall employees passed by and nodded with respect. One of the men in the group referred to him casually, clearly, with weight in his voice. "Yes, Mr. Blake, we'll get that signage changed by Monday." Emily blinked. Her lips parted slightly. Did he just say, "Mr. Blake"? Brandon's expression shifted. He looked toward the large, polished sign above the central fountain, the same fountain they had just strolled past while laughing at the man. It read, in brushed gold lettering, "Blake Plaza." A slow, sinking silence passed between them. "Wait," Brandon said, "is this his mall?" They didn't speak for a while. They just watched. The man, Mr. Blake, was now standing in front of a soon-to-be-open shop, shaking hands with a new tenant. Someone brought him a clipboard. He signed with the ease of someone used to owning things, decisions, spaces, futures. Emily's face flushed, not from the overhead lights but from the heat rising inside her. Shame crept into her chest like a chill dressed in heat. She had laughed at him, judged him, assumed she knew him with nothing more than a glance. Brandon swallowed hard. "We really messed up." Emily didn't answer. She was still staring. Mr. Blake turned then, slowly, casually. His eyes found theirs. For a second they feared he'd call them out, walk up to them, say something, anything, but he didn't. He simply nodded. The same calm, respectful nod he had given earlier. No arrogance, no revenge, just a quiet signal that he had already moved on. And that hurt more than anything else. They stood still, awkward and exposed, as Mr. Blake and his team walked away. The mall's music played on. Shoppers kept walking, but something had changed. Not in the mall, in them. The rest of the day passed in a blur. They walked through stores without speaking. They sat down for coffee, but didn't touch it. The air between them wasn't filled with the usual flirtation or whispered judgment. It was heavy, silent, like an unopened letter they weren't ready to read. In the parking garage, Emily finally spoke. "We thought he didn't belong here." Brandon nodded slowly. "But it's his name on the building." They got into their car. Emily stared out the window as they pulled away. She couldn't stop thinking about the way he looked at them. Not with anger, not with glee, but with a dignity that made her feel small. Not because he tried to humiliate them, but because he didn't. That night, the mall appeared in the background of a news segment on the TV in their living room. The mayor was honoring Jordan Blake, described as a self-made real estate developer, philanthropist, and community leader. They showed old photos of him as a teenager, helping his mom run a street food cart. They played a short interview clip where he spoke about building wealth not just for himself, but for his community. Emily sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped. Brandon didn't speak. When the segment ended, she turned to him. "I feel like we were taught a lesson today." Brandon nodded again. "A quiet one." They didn't go back to the mall for a while, and when they finally did, they didn't walk with the same entitled rhythm. They didn't laugh at people. They didn't assume they knew who belonged and who didn't, because they had learned the hard way that dignity doesn't wear labels, and respect isn't something you show only when you think someone deserves it. It's something you carry inside you, for everyone, especially for those you assume nothing about. Especially for those who own everything you think belongs to you. Emily tried to laugh it off. She did that when she didn't know what else to do, when discomfort started to claw its way up from her stomach into her throat. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and let out a light scoff. "It can't be him," she said, half to Brandon and half to herself. "He's probably just working for the owner." But even as she said the words, they felt thin, fragile, like paper in a storm. They floated, then dropped. She didn't believe them, not really, and the look in Brandon's eyes told her he didn't either. Still, they followed. Not because they wanted to be rude, not because they had some right to know, but because they couldn't help themselves. The man they had mocked, openly, cruelly, casually, was walking with purpose through the center of the mall. And with every step he took, their assumptions began to crumble. He wasn't being shown around. He wasn't being managed. He wasn't looking for directions. He was giving them. He stopped near the atrium, speaking to someone with a clipboard. His tone was calm, but his body language said everything. He was in charge. He gestured toward a row of ceiling lights. The man beside him nodded, took notes, then waved over a technician. It was subtle, professional, seamless, but it was clear. This wasn't a tour. This was authority. They trailed him from a respectful distance, ducking between storefronts like curious children afraid of being caught. Emily's hands were clenched into fists. Brandon kept adjusting the cuffs of his shirt as though that might make him feel more in control of the unraveling moment. Then, just past the central corridor, the group paused outside a new jewelry store. The windows were still covered in red velvet drapes, hiding what lay behind. A velvet rope blocked the entrance. Shoppers passed without paying attention. But then the crowd started to build. A camera crew arrived. A photographer set up his tripod. A woman with a clipboard checked her notes and nodded to someone with an earpiece. Emily and Brandon stood frozen near the edge of the growing crowd. Something was happening. And somehow they knew this man, this Mr. Blake, wasn't just attending, he was the center of it all. The red velvet curtain fell away with a gentle pull. Beneath it, glittering diamonds sparkled under pristine lighting. The storefront gleamed like a crown jewel, and in front of it stood Jordan Blake, now wearing a tailored navy suit. He smiled politely for the cameras as executives surrounded him. Applause erupted, but it wasn't empty or performative. It was genuine. It was earned. The head of public relations stepped forward with a mic in hand. She cleared her throat and looked at the crowd, then at Jordan. "Today, we open a new chapter in the story of Blake Plaza," she began. "And we owe it all to the vision of one man, a man who transformed not just this property, but this community. From humble beginnings, Jordan Blake rose through grit, vision, and perseverance to become one of the youngest and most respected commercial real estate developers in this city. It is with honor that we thank Mr. Blake for making this mall not only a place to shop, but a place to dream." There was more applause. A ribbon was cut. Cameras flashed. But all Emily could hear were her own thoughts, loud, disjointed, filled with static. She felt like the floor had disappeared beneath her. Her breath caught, her eyes stung, her grip on Brandon's arm tightened. She leaned toward him, her voice low and cracking. "We mocked him." Brandon's expression had hardened, but it wasn't with anger. It was with the weight of realization. His voice was dry. "He heard us." The guilt didn't come in waves. It came like a flood, sudden and suffocating. Emily's mind replayed their earlier laughter, the smug tone in her voice, the eye roll, the assumptions. She had stood in the very mall this man owned and treated him like he didn't belong. Mr. Blake turned then, slowly, effortlessly. His eyes scanned the crowd and landed right on them. Emily froze. Her heartbeat slammed in her chest. She expected something, maybe a glare, a raised eyebrow, a moment of confrontation, anything to release the pressure building inside her. But none of that came. Instead, Jordan Blake looked at them with the same calm expression he had worn earlier. He gave them a nod, that same simple nod. No bitterness, no mockery, no judgment, just a quiet acknowledgement. It said everything and nothing all at once. That nod didn't humiliate them. It didn't seek revenge. It didn't need to, because in that brief moment, it reflected something deeper. It showed strength, self-control, grace. And somehow that made it worse. Emily turned away, unable to hold his gaze. Her face burned, the sound of clapping, of celebration, of joy. It all blurred around her. The world had shifted, but not for Jordan, for her, for Brandon, for the ones who had judged without knowing, mocked without understanding, spoken without listening. They began walking back toward the escalators. Neither spoke. There was nothing to say. Their silence wasn't shared, it was individual. Each carried their own shame. Brandon looked down as they descended toward the parking garage. "We didn't just judge him," he said finally. "We revealed something about ourselves." Emily nodded slowly. "I feel sick." She had never been caught doing something wrong like this before, not in a way that made her question who she was. But now, everything felt exposed. Not to Jordan Blake. He didn't need to expose them, he already knew, but to themselves. She realized something she hadn't before. Jordan Blake didn't need their apology. He had power, success, dignity. He didn't need to confront them. He didn't need to say a word. Because the real confrontation was happening inside them. As they stepped into the car and sat in silence, Emily couldn't stop thinking about his eyes. There was no anger in them, but there was history, experience, perhaps even sadness. How many times had he been dismissed? How many places had he walked into only to be seen as lesser? Until a title or a suit changed that. And how many people like her had made him feel invisible? She swallowed hard. Brandon drove his eyes straight ahead. "You think he remembers us?" I think he never forgot, she said softly. They didn't go home right away. They stopped by a park, sat on a bench, listened to the sound of the wind brushing against the trees, watched children play, tried to find something that felt normal again. But normal had changed. Later that night, at home, Emily sat on the couch scrolling through her phone. Jordan Blake's name was everywhere. There were interviews, articles, features on how he'd grown up with a single mother, studied business while working 2 jobs, built his first property with a small grant and pure determination. There was even a video of him speaking at a high school graduation, telling students not to let anyone define their worth by what they wore or where they came from. She played that video 3 times. Brandon stood behind her, watching over her shoulder. "He's everything we're not," he whispered, and somehow he didn't hold it against us. Emily nodded. "We thought we were better, but he was kinder." They didn't talk about what to do next, but deep down, they both knew something had to change, not to make themselves feel better, not to be forgiven, but because now they saw, and once you see, you can't unsee. The mall wasn't just a building. It wasn't just a place for shopping. It was a mirror. And in its marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and polished glass, they had caught a glimpse of who they were, not through the eyes of others, but through the eyes of a man they had underestimated, a man who owned the very ground they stood on. And instead of judging them back, he nodded. That nod became a weight, a lesson, a turning point, not for him, for them. They left the mall in silence. There was no discussion. No hand-holding, no joking, just the steady sound of footsteps across the parking lot, echoing in a space that suddenly felt too large and too quiet. The sun had begun to set, washing the sky in muted gold and dusky pink. But neither of them noticed the colors. Their thoughts were elsewhere, tangled in what had just happened, in what they had just seen, and more importantly, in who they had just been. They had come to the mall looking for watches, for shoes, for things. They had left with something heavier than any shopping bag: awareness. For the first time in their relationship, perhaps in their lives, laughter had disappeared, and it wasn't replaced by an argument or a fight. It was replaced by something more profound, something deeper, a quiet, aching realization that they didn't know as much as they thought they did. Not about the world, not about people, and definitely not about themselves. Back in their apartment, the lights remained off longer than usual. Brandon stood by the window, staring down at the city below, lost in thought. Emily sat on the couch, her phone resting on her knee, glowing in the dim room. Neither spoke. But eventually, silence gave way to curiosity, and curiosity led to a search. Emily opened her browser and typed in his name, Jordan Blake, the man they had mocked. The man who had nodded at them, not out of pity or anger, but out of something she still didn't understand. The search results came fast. Dozens of them, articles, interviews, awards, profiles. She clicked on the first one. He was raised by a single mother in a low-income neighborhood. His father had been absent, and his mother worked 2 jobs, cleaning houses during the day and waiting tables at night. Jordan had helped wherever he could, walking his younger siblings to school, making sure dinner was heated before their mom got home. He had been the first in his family to go to college, attending on a scholarship he earned through essays and after-school programs. He didn't party, he didn't complain, he studied, he dreamed. And when he graduated, he didn't take a job at a big firm. He bought a run-down building with a small grant and some borrowed money from community members who believed in him. He fixed it up himself, painted, scrubbed floors, replaced windows. Then he rented it out at fair prices, not inflated ones. He said his goal was never just to build property, it was to build equity, in people, in neighborhoods, in lives. Emily read until her eyes blurred. Then she whispered almost to herself, "I feel sick." Brandon turned slowly from the window. "We judged him," she said again, this time louder, "just because of how he looked. We saw a hoodie, skin, nothing else." Brandon nodded. His voice was tired. "We saw his skin, not his story." That line stuck in the air like mist, refusing to fade. They didn't try to rationalize it. They didn't excuse it. There was nothing to defend. And in that space, between guilt and understanding, they began to ask harder questions. How many times had they laughed like that? How many people had they silently labeled? How many moments like today had they missed entirely because they were too wrapped in comfort, in privilege, in themselves? The days that followed were quiet, but they weren't empty. The encounter at the mall stayed with them, not like a haunting, but like a shadow, something that followed, reminding them with every step. But instead of running from it, they turned toward it. They began to read more, listen more. They had uncomfortable conversations with friends they never challenged before. They watched documentaries that made them cry. They followed activists and educators on social media, learning about things they had once dismissed as not their problem. Emily, who used to spend her Saturdays at nail salons and brunches, started volunteering at a local youth center. She helped young girls write resumes, listened to their stories, and looked them in the eyes when they spoke. Brandon donated money to a scholarship fund that helped minority students pursue business degrees. He didn't post about it. He didn't need recognition. He just needed to do something that felt right. One afternoon, they walked back into the mall, not to shop, not to gawk, but to do something that had been weighing on Emily's heart since that day. She held a small envelope in her hand, folded in half, sealed gently. They approached the management office. The receptionist greeted them politely. Emily's voice trembled slightly. "Could you please give this to Mr. Blake? It's important." The receptionist looked at her, then at the envelope. "Of course," she said with a nod. They turned and walked away. Emily never expected a response. That wasn't the point. The letter inside wasn't long, but it was honest. She had written about the first moment she saw him near the fountain, about the words she had whispered to Brandon, about the laughter, the assumptions, the ignorance. She told him how wrong they had been, how deeply they regretted it, and how watching him that day had opened their eyes in a way no lecture ever could. She apologized, not for being caught, but for having been blind for so long. She thanked him, not for forgiving them, but for showing them what dignity looks like. She didn't expect him to ever read it, but writing it mattered. Sending it mattered. Sometimes the apology isn't for the person you hurt. Sometimes it's the first step toward becoming someone new. Weeks passed. No reply came, no call, no email. And yet, Emily didn't feel disappointed. She felt peace, because something inside her had shifted. She saw people differently now. Not just as customers or co-workers or strangers in a crowd, but as stories, as journeys, as full human beings. Brandon too had changed. He no longer made offhand jokes at others' expense. He no longer interrupted conversations to insert his own opinion. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, his words carried thought, not ego. They started going on walks again, not to buy things, not to be seen, but to be present. They noticed the world more, its beauty, its pain, its complexity. And though no one else could see the change, they felt it. They weren't trying to prove anything. They weren't trying to fix what couldn't be undone. They were just trying to live better. One evening, as they sat on a bench near the same fountain where it all began, Emily looked up and saw a small family taking photos. A little boy, maybe 6, wore a tiny suit and held a balloon. His father knelt beside him, fixing his tie. His mother took the picture, laughing softly. Emily smiled. She didn't know them, didn't need to. She simply watched, quietly. And in that moment, she understood something she hadn't before. The greatest lessons don't come from humiliation or punishment. They come from grace, from someone choosing not to strike back when they have every right to, from a simple nod in a crowded mall that speaks louder than 1,000 words. From seeing a man rise above judgment with the kind of strength that doesn't need to shout. Jordan Blake never replied. He didn't have to, because his silence wasn't emptiness. It was wisdom, it was confidence, it was power. It was the kind of response only someone with true character can give. And that one silent response became the turning point in 2 lives. Emily and Brandon didn't become perfect people, but they became better ones. They became aware. And once you become aware, you can't go back. Not to ignorance, not to assumptions, not to blind laughter in beautiful malls. That world is gone. In its place is something slower, quieter, kinder. It's not a place you can touch, it's a place you become. And in that place, grace doesn't just change how you see others. It changes how you see yourself. The lesson was never about Jordan Blake. It was about them, and in learning that, they finally saw what had been in front of them all along. Not a man in a hoodie, not a stranger to mock, but a leader, a builder, a teacher, a mirror, a moment, and a reminder that the cost of ignorance is far greater than the price of humility. They had laughed at a man who owned the ground they stood on, and in return he gave them a gift they could never repay. Awareness, the kind that stays, the kind that heals, the kind that transforms, and that was the lesson. The one they never expected, but the one they will carry for the rest of their lives. If you liked this story, please like, subscribe, and share it with others so they can learn something from it too.